Excellent. Questions?
Is more mortgage mayhem on the way?
I beg your pardon?
Is more mortgage mayhem on the way?
What I think the Financial Stability Report showed today is that overall the New Zealand economy is stable and is one that is continuing to deliver good quality jobs to make sure that New Zealanders have got the ability to meet their outgoings. What it also showed was that there is the potential for some borrowers that they will have more mortgage stress in the future. That is, the reality of a situation we've got with interest rates rising. I endorse the call of the Reserve Bank for those people and their banks to talk to each other. I mentioned it last week right here, that banks have a social licence, and part of that is making sure that they look after their customers when there are tough times. And so for the vast bulk of borrowers, the answer to your question is no. For some people, there may be an increase in stress. For many of those people, that will be manageable, but it will be tough for them.
How worried are you about these negative equities numbers?
Yeah, again, these are all about what might happen if things go particularly south over the course of the next year or so. Being in negative equity for a short period of time while you own a house is not uncommon. A house is an asset you hold for a long period of time. But obviously, for those people who borrowed in the last couple of years at very low interest rates, but borrowing very high amounts, as those interest rates rise, some pressure falls upon them. Again, I would say overall, New Zealand's financial system is stable, that for most households, they will get through this tough period. For others who are facing some of those issues, I encourage them to talk to their banks, and in turn, I encourage their banks to work with them carefully during this period.
Those forecasts were not negative equity going up. Do they concern you at all?
Well, obviously for those households it will be very concerning. At a macro level, what the Financial Stability Report tells us is that New Zealand is well positioned to deal with what is a very challenging economic environment globally. For those individual households, they will need to work through with their banks and their own finances as to how they get through this period of time. But in terms of the overall country and the overall stability of our system, New Zealand is well placed.
Does it make you reflect on those calls for a look at the monetary policy response to COVID-19? Obviously, if house prices didn't shoot up quite as high as they did, they wouldn't be falling quite so much as they are.
Yeah, to answer the first part of your question, we've always said in any review of our COVID response, the economic response would be covered in it, and the bank itself, as you know, has been looking at its overall monetary policy work over the last few years. We do then come back to the 2020 hindsight. If we go back to March 2020, I defy you to find anybody who said interest rates would be at the level that they are now in 2 years' time from there. So, we can try and govern in hindsight, or we can govern in the period of time we were in, and I back the decisions that were made.
I suppose just, it might be good to get those, to use the dreadful word, learnings now rather than waiting for them.
Oh, look, it's an ongoing process, and as I said, the Reserve Bank has been doing its own work, obviously, and with external support to look at that. The Select Committee has looked at it over time, and there will be a review. But we constantly learn as we go.
Home ownership aside, it still paints a pretty gloomy picture for other Kiwis. Should they still be bracing for more pain?
Look, what this does is point to a very clear picture that the global economy is slowing down, and we've been talking about that a lot. Our trading partners, some of them are looking towards recession. That will cause issues for New Zealand because we're an open trading economy and for people who live here. But think about the starting point that we've got. Today we have unemployment numbers at 3.3%. We have people in work. They are much better positioned to be able to deal with the global economic shocks than they would otherwise be. We have low levels of debt as a country. We still have goods that the world wants to buy from us. So yes, there are going to be challenging times for some households, some businesses. But as a country, we are as well positioned as anybody else is to get through this.
It looks like there is a high likelihood.
Unemployment rate though good for the economy in the long run?
Well, it's certainly good for the people in work, and I'm never not going to celebrate the fact that we today, not only do we have 3.3% unemployment, we have more people in work in this quarter, about 35,000 more people in work. We should continue to celebrate that. I understand for businesses, many of them have had difficulty hiring the staff that they need. We've been working hard to make sure we train people up, give them the skills, and through immigration be able to address that. So I'm never going to stand here today and not celebrate having low unemployment.
There's some commentary.
Was to the cost of living crisis, is tax cuts have had that report out from the CTU showing that wealthier people get 10 times more than low middle income earners. Does that throw the policy out the door?
Well, National's policy is uncosted, unfunded and unfair. And I actually don't think New Zealanders should trust National on tax. We don't, at this point in time, know exactly when they're going to be bringing these policies in. But what they look to me like are ones that will benefit the wealthiest New Zealanders, not those low and middle income New Zealanders who we've just been talking
Isn't
about.
that criticism a little bit unfair because the CTU numbers are based on the here and now, what inflation is now, but National argue that they won't be releasing their entire policy before the election. So aren't you comparing apples with oranges?
No, what I'm pointing to is a policy that is not, if we believe National, it's a policy that simply does not add up. They're not prepared to put the numbers out until, 1 month before the election? That is not good enough from New Zealand's point of view. And to be frank, you would never let me away with that. So what National are trying to do is say to New Zealanders, trust us. They cannot be trusted on tax. We've had different positions about when elements of the tax policy are going to be brought in. I think when I looked at the numbers that the CTU produced, they're simply looking at what would happen over a 3-year period if National brought their policy in. What would happen is that the wealthiest New Zealanders would benefit the most, while people on low incomes would get $2 a week.
Is it fair to criticise them for waiting for the best and most accurate numbers before they actually put something out to the electorate?
Every single election cycle, we all have to deal with the pre-election fiscal update, but it's pretty rare for a party to not put a policy out. I can tell you in opposition what I did. I put a policy out and then I updated the numbers when pre-FU came out. National should do that as well. That's what National should do too.
On the unemployment numbers.
More levers when it comes to immigration to try and get more skilled workers into the country.
Look, we're constantly looking at the process that we put in place. Obviously, it's new. The immigration reset didn't start effectively until July this year, and so it's only really been going for a couple of months. But you'll be aware that we continually look at things like the green list to see what occupations are on there. We've reopened a number of visa categories for people to be able to apply. We've got record numbers of people coming in for working holiday visas. We've processed those. We're continuing to process the work visas. So we are trying to meet those needs. Clearly, we're coming from a standing start in terms of the border, but I believe those decisions were the right ones.
Some commentators have suggested that unemployment needs to rise for inflation to come down. What do you make of that?
Yeah, again, look, it's a matter of fact that forecasters are saying that unemployment will rise. The budget actually had that forecast in it. I look at it a little bit differently. My job is to continue to support an economy where people have jobs, where there's security in that work, where they're paid well for that work, and where New Zealand's productivity rises. The Reserve Bank have their job, and I acknowledge that. But we are not going to sit back and allow New Zealanders not to get new skills, not to be able to take up new opportunities. This is going to be a challenging period of time. Most people are forecasting that unemployment will rise, but I still think it's the government's job to be able to support New Zealanders to stay and work.
I suppose the question for me is are you hopeful or will you try to keep unemployment in the threes? And do you think it's possible to solve the inflation problem whilst retaining low unemployment?
We're all looking around the world for a solution where we deal with inflation, but we're able to keep our economies operating where people stay and work and where we get that balance in the economy. Most forecasters are predicting unemployment to rise. That is because we are in a period of time where the global economy is slowing severely. We have to do our level best to find that balanced solution. When unemployment doesn't rise too much, we keep inflation down. That's the combined job of monetary and fiscal policy, and I think we can find that balance.
Just on the serviceability of mortgages, how confident are you that people are going to be able to get through this by simply talking to their banks and coming up with agreements? I mean, banks don't exactly have the best track record on.
Well, again, perhaps that's why the Reserve Bank and me over the course of the last week have said similar things about banks and their obligations to their customers, the social licence that they need to keep up. But equally, within the Financial Stability Report today, you also have the Reserve Bank talking about what people will do with their discretionary spending. And we all know in our own lives the people who are going to have to make sure that they just cut back a little bit on certain things. That's the difference between mortgage stress and heading towards things like mortgagee sales. And when you look at where we are, yes, there is definitely going to be more mortgage stress. People will have to manage their finances carefully to get through that, and they will do that, and historically people have done that. The point that I think both the Bank and Reserve Bank and myself are trying to make is, given where our retail banks are at the moment, they're in very solid positions, good profits. This is the time for them to reach the helping hand out to their customers.
But do you think that's enough, just an obligation, strong words from you?
Well, I don't control the banks. Banks are private entities in our economy. Again, to take a step back, every borrower who borrows money goes through a process where their finances are stress tested by banks, and banks always stress test above the rate at which they're going to be lending. So they're already built into that as a process to work with people around affordability. I can't, and I could. It would be a very different country and a very different government if I was obligating banks beyond those rules. What I am saying, though, is this is a period of time where banks have done very well, and I'm sure they will be looking out for their customers.
Just on that, a period of time where banks are doing very well, coming into the earnings season for the banks, we've already seen ANZ come out with a bumper, like $8 or $6 billion profit, plus $2 billion amongst friends, right? Have you got any plans at this point to call for a similar inquiry from the Commerce Commission that we've seen from the petrol industry, the Supermarket Commission, given the fact that one of the bases for the Supermarket Commission, the Supermarket probe, was making excess of $1 million a day in profit?
No, I don't have any immediate plans to answer your question directly, but I think you've heard me say over the course of the last few weeks that banks have a social licence to operate in New Zealand. They do very well. The stability of our banking sector has served New Zealand incredibly well over both this particular financial crisis we've had with COVID and the previous GFC. And so we have to acknowledge it's a good thing that we have banks that are stable and well funded. In turn, they have jobs and obligations to their customers and to New Zealand as a whole. So that's the position I have at this point.
On tax policy, is Labour looking at taking new policy into next year's election based on the work that the Land Revenue staff looking at the welfare?
I think that information that Minister Parker has been looking at will be useful for everybody in terms of getting to the bottom of questions that often get asked about whether all New Zealanders are paying their fair share. In terms of Labour's tax policy, we literally haven't written that, so it's not that I'm not answering your question, we're still working our way through that.
Report out today that suggests that the tax principles consultation might not actually happen for political reasons. Is it still the government's intention to publish that consultation?
Yeah, look, we're still working our way through that. We have a very busy legislative program, but the work that Minister Parker's been doing around what are the underpinning principles of a fair tax system, I think, is important work, just as the work on high net wealth individuals.
Do you think we will see a consultation on that before the election?
You'd need to talk to Mr Parker.
And there are many commentators and forecasters are suggesting that there is a likelihood of a recession in the Northern Hemisphere this winter because of energy prices. If those headwinds made it down here, would you be ready to unveil a sort of muscular fiscal response to that, or do you feel like you've been politically burnt by what's happened with inflation post-COVID?
Well, in answer to the second question, no. But in answer to the first part of the question, I mean, there is a really good lesson in there for not being as reliant as Europe is on oil and gas. You know, in New Zealand, renewable energy is such a significant part of our mix that we are not facing a similar energy crisis as to what they are in Europe. That is a very good thing. In terms of what it means for fiscal policy, though, you know my views on that. We've had to spend a significant amount of money to support New Zealanders through COVID. My view now is that we do need a balanced approach that has a level of fiscal consolidation while we continue to provide targeted support to those who need it the most.
On that, the last BPS next month. Do you have any intention to change the operating allowance that you announced in the budget?
All of that will be covered when we come to the BPS. It's the point of doing a half-yearly update aligned with the budget policy statement, so all of that can wait till December.
Just back on unemployment, economists aren't just predicting a rise, they're saying it's necessary. At the same time, it was predicted that it would be one of the biggest risks to financial stability, it's like. So what kind of balancing act do you play? And it's not economists that are going to be losing their jobs here.
No,
so what will you do to protect?
No, it won't. Look, and you've exactly articulated it. It is a balancing act. I mean, that's a financial stability report from the Reserve Bank saying exactly that about being a risk. Equally, the Reserve Bank has its monetary policy job. What we're all looking for here is the balanced spot, the sweet spot, where inflation does come down, but equally that doesn't have a significant impact on New Zealanders or on the economy. That is exactly what we strive for. The point that I'm making is that while we're being very careful with fiscal policy, equally I want to continue to both support New Zealanders to stay and work, but also to train and retrain. You know, we've had more than 200,000 New Zealanders get free apprenticeships and free targeted trade training. Thousands of people benefiting from mana and mahi. All of those programs are important, and all of those programs are things that the government will keep doing.
You said in your press release that wages are outpacing inflation. Do you think Kiwis at home are really feeling better off?
Oh, look, New Zealanders know because they go to the supermarket or from, the petrol station or wherever that they're feeling those price increases. Those are the statistics that Statistics New Zealand put out today, and they do show that average hourly earnings are keeping up with inflation. But that won't stop people feeling when they go to places that prices are increasing, because they are. What that speaks to, though, is a strong and robust economy in New Zealand that continues to produce jobs and continues to give people decent pay. That's a good thing.
Well, and just a little change of tack here. As Deputy Prime Minister, do you believe that Pacific countries should be added to the visa waiver list?
There's no plan for that change in policy at this stage. We continue to work closely with our Pacific neighbours around migration issues, both through things like the RSE scheme, but also the Pacific Access Quota, the Samoan Quota. And so we do, can have good and important relationships there. But the way in which visa applications are treated from those in Pacific countries are the same as they're treated from those in other countries.
Why do they have visas?
Well, I mean, we make decisions as a country, and we have historically, about how we manage the flow of people coming into our country. And while for some countries we can have visa waivers, for others we don't. We do that because we need to manage the flow of people that come into our country. The vast majority of people who apply for visitor visas from the Pacific get them granted. And all of the same criteria are applied whether you're applying from there or another country that requires a visa.
Let's wrap it up. One more.
Yep.
We had the CTU report, we've had the financial stability report today, we've also had unemployment. Has it been like Christmas Day for you?
What it's been like is a day where I can reflect on the fact that the New Zealand economy is in relatively good shape. I understand the pressures that households are facing, but at least New Zealand is facing them with 3.3% unemployment, a stable financial sector. When it comes to the CTU's report, I just repeat, the National Party have got an unfair, unfunded, uncosted policy, and I think New Zealanders should judge them on that, and actually they can't be trusted on tax because they can't even tell us how it's going to be implemented.
Sorry, Minister, what's the government doing to keep Maori unemployment down?
Yeah, look, we've a significant number of programs that we've invested in to lower Māori unemployment, and that's programs like He Potama Rangatahi, like Mana and Mahi. We continue to have an aggressive program there. We have a Māori employment action plan that involves us working alongside iwi, alongside Māori business, and I actually think that declining Māori unemployment rate that we've seen over as a trend over the time we've been in government is something to be proud of.
Thank you.
Thank you.